Big Shaq walks into a bank to pay off a struggling mom's debt. But the banker laughs, calls it a scam, and refuses. Big mistake. What happens next flips the entire system upside down, and by the time it's over, no one will ever doubt his generosity again. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us, where are you watching from? Share in the comments below. Shaquille O'Neal had always believed in giving back. He had seen what kindness could do, how a single act could change someone's entire life. He didn't just write checks and walk away, he showed up. He made sure people knew they weren't alone. That's why, on a bright Tuesday afternoon, he found himself walking into a small community bank in Atlanta, ready to change a life. The branch wasn't anything fancy. Outdated carpet, buzzing fluorescent lights, and a line of tired customers waiting for their turn. People who weren't here to discuss stock portfolios or luxury investments. They were here to survive. Shaq had heard about Olivia Carter, a single mother working 2 jobs just to stay afloat. She had fallen behind on her loan payments, and the bank was ready to take everything. Her car, her apartment, the only security she had left for her son, Jaden. That wasn't going to happen. Shaq walked through the glass doors, his towering frame instantly drawing attention. The quiet hum of the bank came to a halt as heads turned. Customers whispered, employees exchanged wide-eyed glances. A 7-foot, world-famous NBA legend had just stepped into their local bank. But Shaq wasn't here for attention. He spotted Olivia at the counter, nervously gripping the strap of her purse. She looked exhausted, her clothes neat but worn, her hair pulled back like someone who hadn't had time for herself in years. She spoke in hushed tones with the teller, her voice filled with quiet desperation. Shaq walked up beside her, his presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. Olivia turned, eyes widening as she realized who was standing next to her. "Hey," Shaq said, his deep voice warm, reassuring. "I heard you've been having a hard time. Let me take care of it." At first, she didn't respond. She just stared at him, blinking, as if her brain couldn't process what she'd just heard. I'm sorry," she finally managed. Shaq smiled. "Your loan, your debt, all of it. I'm paying it off today." Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse tighter, as if bracing herself for a cruel joke. "You don't have to do that," she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't even know what to say." "Don't have to say anything," Shaq replied. "Just tell me where to sign." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. This was more than money. This was relief, hope, a second chance. The teller, a young woman in her early 20s, looked equally stunned. She turned toward the back office, unsure what to do next. And that's when the moment turned. A voice cut through the bank, dripping with skepticism. "Hold on just a second." Everyone turned toward the source of the interruption. Standing behind the counter, arms folded, was Nathan Holloway. Nathan was the kind of banker who lived for rules, fine print, and making people feel small. He was in his late 40s, with slicked back blonde hair and an expensive navy suit. Everything about him screamed entitlement. And right now, he was looking at Shaq like he was a problem. "You can't just walk in here and throw money around," Nathan scoffed. "We have procedures. Fraud prevention policies. Ever heard of them?" Shaq raised an eyebrow, keeping his cool. He had seen this look before. The dismissive, condescending expression of a man who didn't like being told he wasn't the most important person in the room. "This isn't fraud," Shaq said evenly. "I'm paying off her debt. That's it." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, come on. A celebrity walks in and suddenly wants to wipe out someone's loan. Do you have any idea how many scams we deal with?" He turned to Olivia. "Are you in on this?" The words landed like a slap. Olivia flinched, her body shrinking as she instinctively looked down. Shaq saw the embarrassment flood her face, the shame creeping into her posture. And that was the moment everything changed. Shaq, who had remained calm and composed, now straightened up. The air in the bank shifted. This wasn't just about Olivia anymore. This was about something bigger. Nathan smirked, clearly believing he had shut the situation down. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. The tension in the bank thickened. What had started as an act of kindness was now turning into a public humiliation. Nathan Holloway didn't budge from behind the counter. His smirk widened, his condescending gaze bouncing between Shaq and Olivia. He looked amused, like this was some sort of joke that only he was in on. "I'm sorry," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "But this isn't how we do things here. Random acts of charity don't just happen, especially not from someone like you." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Shaq's jaw tightened, but he didn't react. He had dealt with men like Nathan before. People who thought power was about denying others opportunities. People who felt threatened by change. Olivia, on the other hand, visibly shrank. She had been holding on to hope, gripping it with both hands like a lifeline, and now it was slipping away in front of a room full of strangers. Nathan turned to her, arms crossed. "You knew he was coming in today?" Olivia blinked, caught off guard. "No, I didn't know." Nathan chuckled, shaking his head. "Right. And yet here you are, conveniently getting your debt paid off by an NBA superstar. Almost like you planned this." A few customers nearby exchanged glances, their curiosity turning into silent judgment. Olivia's face burned. She wasn't a scammer. She wasn't looking for a handout. She was a mother trying to survive. And now, thanks to Nathan, she felt like a criminal. Shaq took a step closer to the counter, his deep voice steady, firm. "I don't know what kind of people you usually deal with, but I don't play games with people's lives." Nathan let out a mocking laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, please. Celebrities like you get scammed all the time. Sob stories, fake foundations, bad investments. You guys are easy targets." Shaq's expression didn't change, but something in the room shifted. The bank staff was watching now. Customers had stopped pretending to scroll through their phones. Everyone was tuned in, waiting to see how this would play out. Nathan was loving it. He leaned against the counter, emboldened by the attention. "Look, man, I get it. You want to be the hero. Feels good, right? But we have policies for a reason. And my job? It's to make sure we don't let every sob story walk away with a free check." Shaq said nothing. Nathan grinned, taking Shaq's silence as a sign of retreat. "So no offense, but I'm not processing this payment. Not today. Not ever. If she's in debt, that's her problem. Not yours. Not mine." The words cut through Olivia like a blade. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor before the weight of the moment crushed her completely. For years she had kept her head down, worked double shifts, sacrificed sleep, comfort, dignity, all to keep her son fed, to keep a roof over their heads. And now, in front of a room full of strangers, she was being told, point blank, that she wasn't worth helping. Her chest tightened. Her eyes burned. And worst of all, she was afraid Shaq would walk away. Not because she would blame him, but because this wasn't his fight. Why should he stand up for her, a woman he didn't even know, in a place where she had never been respected? She swallowed hard, staring at the floor, waiting for the moment he left. But Shaq wasn't going anywhere. He had seen a lot of things in his life. He had experienced racism, classism, greed, and corruption in all its forms. But nothing pissed him off more than a man who thought power meant stepping on the weak. He slowly turned toward Olivia. "You trust me?" he asked, his voice low but strong. Olivia looked up, caught off guard. What? Shaq gave her a small, reassuring nod. "Do you trust me?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Good," he said, "because I'm not done yet." And just like that, the game changed. All eyes were on Shaquille O'Neal. Nathan Holloway, still smug behind the counter, leaned back in his chair like he had just won a game no one else was playing. He thought Shaq would get frustrated, argue, maybe even storm out. That's how these things usually went. But Shaq wasn't like everyone else. Instead of raising his voice, instead of letting the heat of the moment take over, he exhaled slowly and turned to the nearest bank employee. "Get me your manager." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The weight behind them was enough. A flicker of nervousness passed through the young teller's face. She glanced at Nathan, hesitating, unsure what to do. Nathan, however, laughed. Sure, he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Go get Linda." Let's see what she thinks about all this. The teller disappeared into the back, leaving an uneasy silence in her wake. Nathan was still too confident. He drummed his fingers against the counter, his smirk firmly in place. "You think calling my manager is going to change anything?" he said, shaking his head. "We have policies, big guy. You don't just get to walk in here and demand we break them because you're famous." Shaq didn't reply. Instead, he folded his arms across his chest, standing completely still. He had played this game before. People like Nathan always folded under pressure. They just didn't know it yet. A few moments later, the door to the back office opened, and Linda Grayson, the branch manager, stepped out. She was in her mid-50s, with short silver hair, rectangular glasses, and the practiced smile of someone used to de-escalating conflicts. Unlike Nathan, she didn't look amused. She looked concerned. "Mr. O'Neill," she greeted, her tone smooth, carefully controlled. "I'm Linda Grayson. How can I help you today?" Shaq studied her for a moment before speaking. "Your employee," he said, nodding toward Nathan, "just accused this woman of fraud because I offered to pay off her loan. He refused to process the payment." Linda's smile tightened just a fraction. She turned to Nathan, who suddenly looked a little less sure of himself. "Nathan," she said, keeping her voice measured, "is that true?" Nathan, ever the performer, sighed dramatically. "Look, Linda, I was just doing my job," he said. "This situation seemed suspicious. Big celebrity walks in and suddenly wants to wipe out some random woman's debt. That doesn't raise any red flags for you?" Shaq noticed it immediately, the hesitation in Linda's expression. The way her fingers twitched slightly, the way her gaze flickered to Olivia, then back to Nathan. She wasn't outright agreeing with him, but she wasn't exactly shutting him down either. And that told Shaq everything he needed to know. She wasn't overtly biased like Nathan, but she was comfortable with the system that allowed people like Olivia to be doubted. She cleared her throat, adjusting her glasses. "I'm sure there was no ill intent here," she said smoothly. "Nathan was simply trying to follow protocol. I understand this situation might feel frustrating, but we do have fraud prevention policies in place to protect our customers." Shaq nodded slowly, letting her words settle. "Fraud prevention?" he repeated. "You think I'm being scammed?" Linda hesitated. "Not necessarily, but..." Shaq leaned forward slightly, his deep voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable weight. "Then what exactly is the problem, Linda?" Her lips parted slightly, as if she was searching for the right words. But before she could answer, Shaq switched gears. "Pull up Olivia Carter's account history," he said. "I want to see every loan application, every rejection, every policy-based decision your bank has made about her." The room went still. Linda blinked. I'm not sure I can do that." Shaq tilted his head slightly. "Why not?" "You just said this is about fraud prevention. Let's make sure there's nothing suspicious happening, right?" Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. Linda hesitated again, but Shaq wasn't asking any more. He took out his phone and, in one smooth motion, hit record. "If you're confident your bank has been treating its customers fairly, then there shouldn't be any issue with transparency," he said. A beat of silence. Then, something in Linda cracked. Her shoulders tensed, and for the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. "Mr. O'Neill," she said, her voice quieter now, "I don't think this is necessary." "I do," Shaq said, cutting her off. He wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. But suddenly, he was the most powerful person in that room. Nathan swallowed hard. The confidence he had displayed just moments ago was gone, because he knew what was coming, and so did Linda. The more Shaq scanned the bank's records, the clearer the truth became. Olivia wasn't the first. At first, he had been focused on her case, on the unfairness of one struggling mother being denied help when she needed it most. But now, standing in the middle of the bank, his eyes moving over the data on the screen, he saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one woman's denied loan. This was systemic. The bank had a pattern, one that had been running quietly for years, buried under layers of corporate jargon and risk assessment policies. The screen in front of him didn't show numbers. It showed lives broken by a rigged system. Loan applications denied without explanation. Financial assistance cut off for no clear reason. Accounts from low-income neighborhoods flagged as high risk. Shaq's stomach tightened as he scrolled through name after name. Each rejection was another door slammed in someone's face. A single father trying to open a barbershop, denied. A young woman with a full-time job and no credit card debt, denied. A retired veteran applying for a home loan, denied. All of them stamped with the same generic rejection reason: does not meet internal risk criteria. What did that even mean? And then, the pattern became even clearer. Nearly all of these applicants were Black or Hispanic. Shaq clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't about protecting the bank from fraud. This was discrimination, disguised as policy. Nathan, who had been watching this unfold from his chair, let out a low chuckle. Shaq looked up. Nathan still had that same smug, satisfied expression, as if he had seen this play out before and already knew how it would end. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't apologetic. He was amused. "Problem?" Nathan asked, tilting his head slightly. Shaq didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. Nathan let out a sigh, shaking his head. "Look, big guy, I know what you're thinking, but you're reading too much into this." Shaq stayed quiet, his eyes locked on Nathan. "This isn't about race," Nathan continued, gesturing toward the screen like it was nothing. "It's just company policy." Shaq didn't blink. Nathan leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was letting Shaq in on some inside joke. "You know how it is. Some people just don't have the financial history we're looking for. It's not personal. It's business." Shaq exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around his phone. He wasn't angry. Not in the way Nathan expected him to be. Because this wasn't just about one corrupt banker. This was an entire system built to keep people exactly where they were. Shaq turned back to the records, digging deeper. The pattern stretched back years, the same neighborhoods, the same types of applicants, the same excuses. He saw mortgage rejections that had no real reason behind them. Business loans denied for entrepreneurs who met every qualification. Families forced to take out high-interest payday loans because traditional lenders refused to approve them. The bank wasn't just declining people, it was keeping them trapped. Because when you block access to financial growth, you block access to opportunity. This wasn't just about money. This was about power. Shaq had spent his whole life fighting to prove people wrong. First, they said he was too big to play basketball the way he did. Then, they said he was too famous to be a serious businessman. Now, they wanted him to believe he was too small to take on a system this big. They were wrong. He wasn't just going to call this out. He was going to burn their entire playbook to the ground. Shaq had been in countless high-pressure situations before. He had played in front of millions, made split-second decisions in championship games, and negotiated billion-dollar deals. But in this moment, standing in the middle of a small Atlanta bank, watching power being abused right in front of him, he knew exactly what he needed to do. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He pressed the record. The moment the camera started rolling, everything changed. Shaq held his phone steady, capturing everything. Nathan Holloway, sitting behind the counter looking bored, smug, untouchable. Olivia Carter, standing beside Shaq, tears welling in her eyes, shrinking under the weight of the moment. The uncomfortable glances from other bank employees, watching but saying nothing. Nathan wasn't fazed. If anything, he looked amused. He leaned back in his chair, a half smirk on his face, and let out a mocking laugh. "This isn't my problem," he said. Shaq's camera caught the exact moment he said it. And in that instant, Nathan's fate was sealed. Shaq didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The video spoke for itself. He stopped recording, took a deep breath, and posted it. Within minutes, the internet exploded. At first, it started with a few retweets, a couple of comments. Then, like a match hitting gasoline, the fire spread. People weren't just watching, they were furious. A millionaire offers to pay off a struggling mom's debt and a bank says no? Make it make sense. This ain't just a mistake. This is how they keep people in poverty. The way Olivia is just standing there, embarrassed, like she did something wrong. Man, this hurt to watch. Hashtags started trending. Let Shaq pay, Shar banking while black, Shar justice for Olivia. And then? The media picked it up. News stations ran the clip on repeat. Talk shows debated whether this was an isolated incident or proof of deep-rooted discrimination in banking. Business analysts dissected the bank's fraud policies, while activists called for nationwide banking reform. Some journalists defended Shaq, praising him for using his platform to expose injustice. Others twisted the narrative, questioning his motives. Was this just another celebrity publicity stunt? Was he manipulating the story for attention? Was there more to the bank's refusal than what was shown? But it didn't matter how they spun it, because the truth was already out there. And now? Nathan Holloway wasn't just a smug banker behind a desk anymore. He was the face of everything wrong with the system. By the next morning, bank executives were in full panic mode. They had underestimated the situation. They thought this would blow over, that people would forget. But the internet doesn't forget. Customers started closing accounts. Stockholders started asking questions. Journalists started digging into the bank's history. And when companies feel pressure, they scramble. Within 24 hours, the bank released a carefully worded statement, trying to take control of the narrative. They didn't apologize. They didn't admit fault. Instead, they blamed Shaq and Olivia. According to their version of events, this was all a miscommunication. A misunderstanding between a well-meaning bank employee and a celebrity customer unfamiliar with standard banking procedures. It was slick. Too slick. They called Shaq's actions disruptive and suggested that Olivia's financial struggles were more complicated than they appeared. They even implied that Shaq had jumped to conclusions without understanding the bank's protocols. But the public wasn't buying it, because the video didn't lie. Nathan Holloway had been caught dismissing a struggling mother and smirking about it in front of the world. No corporate statement could erase that image, and now? It wasn't just about Olivia anymore. It was about every person who had ever walked into a bank and felt invisible. While the bank was trying to control the story, Nathan Holloway was watching his entire world collapse. His name was everywhere. Articles exposed his history. Former customers came forward, sharing stories of their own unfair treatment. Journalists dug up old complaints. Ex-employees spoke anonymously about the culture at the bank. Nathan had been protected for years. But now, no one was protecting him. By the end of the week, he had been placed on temporary leave. To the public, it seemed like a punishment, like accountability. But behind closed doors, Nathan wasn't being punished. He was being protected. Shaq had won the first battle. But the war wasn't over. Nathan might have been the face of the problem, but he wasn't the real issue. This wasn't just about one arrogant banker. This was about a system built to keep people exactly where they were. And now? Shaq wasn't just going to expose it. He was going to burn their entire playbook to the ground. The damage had already been done. The video was everywhere. News stations ran the clip on repeat. Social media was on fire, and the bank was under siege. Executives at corporate headquarters had never expected this. They had seen PR nightmares before, bad customer service, minor scandals, controversial policies, but nothing this public, this damaging, this uncontrollable. And so, they did what corporations always do. They tried to spin the story. Within 24 hours, the bank released a public statement, a textbook corporate response designed to shift the blame without admitting any fault. They didn't apologize. They didn't acknowledge wrongdoing. Instead, they called it a miscommunication. According to them, Nathan Holloway, the banker at the center of the controversy, had simply been following protocol. Shaq had misunderstood the situation, and Olivia's financial struggles were more complex than they appeared. The statement emphasized that the bank had always been committed to diversity and fairness, and that they would be reviewing their internal policies to ensure better customer experiences in the future. It was vague, hollow, and completely meaningless. But corporate damage control wasn't about fixing the problem. It was about making people move on. As public pressure mounted, the bank announced Nathan Holloway had been placed on temporary leave. It was supposed to look like consequences, like justice. But behind closed doors, Nathan wasn't being punished. He was being protected. Leaked emails from inside the company revealed the truth. Nathan was being praised, not penalized. Executives called him a team player. They assured him he had handled a difficult situation the way he was trained to. One manager even told him to stay low until the backlash died down. Shaq saw right through it. They weren't firing him. They were waiting for the public to forget. But Shaq wasn't going to forget. He knew this went deeper than Nathan. This wasn't just about one arrogant banker making a bad decision. This was about a system designed to deny people like Olivia opportunities while hiding behind policies and paperwork. And so, he started investigating. He reached out to former employees, people who had worked at the bank and left after seeing things they couldn't ignore. He spoke with customers who had been denied loans for reasons that never made sense. And the truth was worse than he imagined. This bank had been running the same scam for years. They rejected loans from low-income neighborhoods at a much higher rate than wealthier applicants. They flagged minority customers as high risk more often than others. They created barriers that ensured struggling families stayed struggling, rejecting assistance, offering high-interest loans instead of real financial solutions, and setting up policies that punished people for being poor. And they got away with it because, on paper, it all looked like standard banking procedures. But it wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. And Shaq wasn't about to let them cover it up. Shaq had seen the corporate playbook before. Deny, deflect, delay. They thought a carefully worded statement would calm the public. They thought putting Nathan Holloway on leave would make people forget. They thought Shaq would be satisfied with the exposure and move on. They were wrong. This wasn't just about calling them out. This was about taking back power. And Shaq? He wasn't going to let them control the board. So instead of just exposing the bank's corruption, he bought the entire thing. No one saw it coming. Banks weren't supposed to be flipped like basketball teams. They were too big, too protected, too deeply rooted in their ways. But what no one realized was that this particular community bank was already struggling. It had been losing money for years, mismanaged and bleeding from bad loans and corporate greed. It was weak, vulnerable in a way that only someone with real power could exploit. Shaq didn't just expose the cracks, he broke the entire foundation. In one bold stroke, he bought them out, taking full control of the same institution that had once denied Olivia and so many others. The same place where Nathan had laughed in her face now belonged to the very people he had tried to keep out. Shaq's first move? Nathan Holloway was gone, not suspended, not on leave, fired, permanently. There was no quiet dismissal, no exit package, no second chances. Nathan had built a career on blocking opportunities for others. Now he was the one locked out. Olivia Carter, the woman who had been humiliated in front of a bank full of people, she was the first person Shaq called. She didn't just get her loan cleared, she got a new position, working in the very bank that once tried to break her. She wasn't just a customer anymore, she was part of the solution. With Nathan gone, Shaq turned to the real mission, fixing the system from the inside. The entire corporate structure was dismantled. The fraud prevention policies that had been used to deny people based on race and income? Eliminated. The hidden fees and predatory interest rates designed to keep people in debt? Gone. The high-risk flags placed on loan applicants from low-income communities? Wiped clean. Shaq overhauled everything. He introduced low-interest home loans for working-class families. He created small business programs that gave entrepreneurs a real chance to succeed. He established financial literacy workshops so people could build wealth instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. The goal was simple. This bank wasn't going to keep people out anymore. It was going to lift them up. The financial industry didn't know what to do. Banks weren't supposed to be run like this. They were built on gatekeeping, fine print, and profits over people. But Shaq? He had rewritten the rules. And now the world was watching. Some called him reckless. Some said he didn't know what he was doing. Some claimed the bank wouldn't last. But then, the results started showing. More people approved for loans, more businesses thriving, more families owning homes instead of just renting. And suddenly, other banks had to pay attention, because Shaq hadn't just bought a bank. He had started a movement. For the first time in years, Olivia Carter woke up without the crushing weight of debt pressing against her chest. The fear of eviction, the stress of unpaid bills, the shame of always being one step away from losing everything. It was gone. What had started as a moment of humiliation in that bank had turned into something she never expected. A second chance. And not just for her. For Jaden, too. With her debt cleared, Olivia could finally breathe. She no longer had to pick up extra shifts at the diner, no longer had to cancel Jaden's field trips or skip meals just to make rent. But more than that, she could finally dream again. And her first step? Going back to school. It had been years since she had even considered the idea. Every time she had tried, life had gotten in the way. There was always another bill to pay, another unexpected expense, another reason to put herself last. But now there were no excuses. She enrolled in college, determined to build a better future. Not just for herself, but for Jaden. She wanted to give him a life where he wouldn't have to watch his mother struggle, where he wouldn't have to grow up too fast, worrying about things no child should have to think about. And Shaq? He wasn't done helping. The moment he met Jaden, he saw something in him. A quiet strength, a determination that reminded him of himself as a kid. So he made a promise, not just to Olivia, but to Jaden too. He became a mentor, teaching Jaden the power of perseverance, of kindness, of standing up for what's right. Not just through words, but through action. He took Jaden to basketball courts and boardrooms, showing him that success wasn't just about talent, it was about character. He taught him that power wasn't about having more than others. It was about lifting others up. And Jaden? He listened, he learned, and he grew. But Olivia's journey didn't stop with her education. She wanted to give back. Because she knew what it felt like to be at rock bottom. She knew what it felt like to feel invisible, ignored, discarded. And now, she was in a position to help others. So when Shaq launched his new financial program, designed to help struggling families break the cycle of poverty, Olivia was one of the first people he called. She didn't just take the job. She made it her mission. She sat across from single mothers just like her, women who felt trapped, who believed the system was stacked against them. And she told them the truth. It wasn't just about money. It was about knowledge, about access, about fighting back against a system that wanted them to stay down. She wasn't just helping people get loans. She was helping them reclaim their power. And as she walked into her office each morning, the same woman who once felt unworthy of help, the same woman who once stood in that bank with her head down, ashamed, now stood tall, confident, ready to change lives. Her story wasn't just one of survival, it was one of transformation. Because she wasn't the same woman anymore. She was proof that one act of kindness could ripple out and change everything. Nathan Holloway had once sat behind a polished desk, believing he was untouchable. He had smirked as he denied loans, shrugged as he crushed opportunities, and dismissed people like Olivia Carter as if their struggles were just another company policy. But now, that same arrogance had led to his downfall. With his career in ruins and his name synonymous with public disgrace, Nathan found himself on the other side of the system he once controlled. His severance package, once a safety net, quickly dwindled. He had assumed another bank would hire him, that he could quietly slip back into the industry. But he was wrong. Word had spread. No bank wanted a public relations nightmare on their payroll. Every application was met with the same response: a polite rejection or complete silence. The financial world, the very world he had used to keep others down, had now shut him out. And while Nathan struggled in obscurity, the bank he once worked for was falling apart. The scandal had crippled its reputation. Customers had closed accounts by the thousands. Investors had pulled their money. The stock price had plummeted. Meanwhile, Shaq's newly acquired community bank was thriving. For the first time, customers felt like they were being heard. Loans were being approved based on merit, not bias. Small businesses were getting a fair shot. Families were building futures instead of drowning in debt. But the most poetic part of it all? Olivia Carter, the woman who had once been humiliated in that very bank, was now part of the leadership team shaping its future. She sat in meetings where real decisions were made. She helped create policies that ensured no one would ever feel the way she once did. She became the voice for those who had been silenced for too long. And in the final scene, Shaq stood on the sidelines of a neighborhood basketball court, watching as Jaden dribbled down the court, his face lit up with determination. Shaq had done a lot in his life. He had won championships, built businesses, and made millions. But standing there, watching Jaden chase his dreams without fear, he knew this was his greatest victory. Because this was never just about money. It was about changing lives. If you love powerful comebacks, real justice, and game-changing moves, you're in the right place. Stories like this aren't just told. They're felt, and there's more where that came from. Stay with us for more high-stakes drama, real-world impact, and stories that prove one move can change everything. Because in this game, the underdog never stays down for long.